Right, so it's what the government are doing now is actually complete and totally clear now. I've got the whole kind of like strategy and model is really clear. I know that loads and loads and loads of people through hundreds of groups, if not thousands of groups, have all been, people are switched on now to like, there's this what we call it, the agenda. People like Claire Dyer and Kingsley Hamilton and Tommy Robinson, the whole like everyone really, well, everyone's got some part of it on focus, right? So there's this like pressing agenda, right? And we know that the Chinese government have got this whole system where people don't have any personal privacy because the government are observing them and studying, not only studying them, but how you act and behave all the time. They have given themselves, the ability to know about it or the right to know about it, and then you are penalized. You're basically measured on your behaviour, right? And you've got this called this points or whatever, but you can't have a right to privacy with that, or it can't work. Now, the thing with, as the government got a right to know all these things, right, but not other private individuals, but apparently other private individuals can report you in. So, but then there's companies and businesses. Now, this is really important. Companies and businesses, and then private individuals, and then the government, right? So, here is the Human Rights Act 1998, the guide to it. And on this page here, right, this tells you about the right to privacy. And there are these 2 points, okay, which are here, A and B. And I'm going to read them out, because I recorded a video yesterday, and it was quite a long video, but after I'd finished it, I was reading that page, and then I rang Rachel Reeves and left an answering machine message, because I was looking at it, and I'm like, how can this justify pay per mile, right? Because firstly, we've already got taxation for travel, right? We've already got taxation for, charging vehicles up and for buying fuel, okay? It already exists. So now, if they want to do this pay per mile, they've got to be looking into how far we're travelling, but it won't only be how far we're travelling, it'll be where we're travelling as well, or where we've been, or how far we've been. Now, that's all personal, private information, where your family's going and where it's been, right? Now, let me just read these 2 out, right? Because this is what they've got in this Blackstone's Guide to the Human Rights Act. This is what really important, these 2 points. For the right to privacy. But it also includes for governments as well to justify them, our privacy. And remember that you can challenge the law if it doesn't comply with the human rights through the courts, right? Because they've got a special process for challenging the law. That's an interference, so that an interference, that's with our privacy, corresponds to a pressing social need, right? Does it correspond with a pressing social need, and that it is proportionate to the legitimate aim pursued? Now, these are meant to be the 2 main tests for this, right? For the right to privacy, according to this Blackstone's Guide and the Human Rights Act 1998, right? Which is an important book, really. I've got the 2nd edition, but this is important, right? Now, I'm going to use this pay per mile model, right? Because they're wanting to bring this pay per mile tax in for travel, and that Jeff Buys Cars channel's kicking off about it, right? Firstly, right, there isn't a pressing need for any change in taxation on travel, because we've already got one, right? We've already got one, and it's been perfectly adequate. There's nothing wrong with it. There isn't anything wrong with it. There isn't an urgent or pressing need to change it. And if you change over to a system where you just buy fuel, right, and you pay for the fuel you buy, to move over to a system what wants to know how far you're travelling all the time and how far you've travelled, potentially also where you're going to and where you've been, surely what is the aim with the taxation of the vehicle though? Surely the legitimate aim of it has to be originally to raise revenue, right? And this is what I said to Rachel Reeves on the phone. I said, Rachel, the legitimate aim of revenue is to raise money for the government, right? So when you're filling your car up, right, the legitimate aim, honest aim, is to raise money for the government. It has to be, because that's why you tax things, right? You only tax it. The purpose and existence of tax is to raise money for the government. Now, if they swap into a system where, we're raising tax for the government, but also we'll be knowing where you're going and where you're travelling to and where you've been and where you come from and all this, right? Is the primary legitimate aim of this to know all your personal business, where you're travelling to and where you've been? I thought the aim. What is the aim? Well, actually, I think their aim is to know all our private information, because that's what the China government is doing now. The aim of the China government, you don't have any privacy, you can, or their model won't work. So, what is the legitimate aim of Rachel Reeves' tax revenue model, swapping it over to a model which looks into all the information about, how far you're travelling or how far you've travelled or where you've travelled for or where you're travelling to, right? Well, that's a new aim, because it seems to me that the aim is to be like the Chinese government and know everything about us so they can boss us more and tell us what to do and basically run the country like that government, but we don't have that government system here. We've got democracy. And the right to privacy prevents us from having a government like that, because a government like that doesn't have any privacy left by the time they've implemented these things. So it seems to me that their true aim is to obliterate privacy and not have any left. So that means that it goes against the right, surely. The only legitimate aim of taxation surely is to raise money for the government, right? They're already raising money for the government through fuel. So why do they need to change it, right? And what about social? Is there a pressing social need to change taxation on vehicles? Not really, no. Why does it matter who your friends are or what you do with your friends or anything like that? By changing a different type of fuel duty over. In fact, raising revenue's got nothing to do with social things. It's purely financial, right? Surely. So, I don't think Reeves can do this paper mile because she's got an illegitimate aim attached to it, and when you investigate where they're going, why when you question why would they want to know where we've been, where we're going, how far we've been, how far we've going, it's actually it's going into it's getting the foot through the door, or it's getting their way into knowing about our private information, which is what the Human Rights Act's supposed to prevent. Why should a government need to know all our private and personal information for tax revenue purposes when you pay when you buy the fuel? There's nothing wrong with that. Put it this way. Why does it? What's the reason that it exists? The reason that it exists is to raise money. And does it raise money? Yes, it does, right? So there is no other pressing need. Now, when they expand their intentions and goals, like it says here, what is the aim? Their aim is going beyond the scope of raising revenue. Their aim is going into knowing information about us. And as they're doing that with more and more different areas of the government, piece by piece, like a jigsaw puzzle, they're actually taking away so we don't have any privacy left at all. So it's not a legitimate aim. In fact, we know what the aim is now. The aim is revealed. because it's the Chinese government aim. That's the aim, to have like a Chinese government when you don't have any privacy. So what's the illegitimate aim that is attached to the reason that Rachel Reeves wants to switch over to paper mile? Because the aim is, by the time they've finished, we don't have any privacy. And what's the point of the Human Rights Act, Article 8, is to protect privacy, but they don't want us to have any by the time they've finished, right? So it's not a legitimate aim. In fact, now we know that Suella Braverman says that she wants to scrap the Human Rights Act. The only thing it seems to have been doing is protecting, letting foreigners come into the country and stay in the country, right? They seem to be able to get the lawyers and get all the legal cases won. The foreigners are using it. And then this is the thing. By the time we've got all these illegal immigrants coming over on the boats and all these ones they're flying over on the planes and all these hotels that people are protesting out of, right? What I know what they're doing now, and I know why they're doing it and how they're doing it. It's all completely and totally falling into place, right? Everyone's been sort of talking about it, but it's absolutely crystal clear now, right? They've created a pressing social need in crime and, on the streets and violence and all these attacks and all these other things, so that by flooding with immigration and that, they're making pressing social need in order so they can give an excuse to want to have more surveillance and facial recognition and all these other things, which take away our privacy. But we didn't have a pressing social need when we didn't have all these people coming over on the boats, when there wasn't a war. So I think that this war is intentional, and then they've directed all these. They had all these companies directing people over and telling them how to get here and everything like that, right? They've even got lawyers, to win them legal cases, so they've got the right to be here. The legal sector is helping them invaders and actually taking the Human Rights Act away. Joylan Mohan, right? He needs to wake up, right? Joylan Mohan is meant to be all like, he's like, Keir Starmer is meant to be a Human Rights Act person. That's his whole career. This is what I said to Rachel Reeves, right? But Joylan Mohan is like, oh yeah, Human Rights Act, but he's into all these transgender cases and sexuality and all these other things, right? But I can tell Joylan Mohan now, right? There isn't going to be a Human Rights Act in 1998. And many of his cases to do with gender and people coming into the country and immigration and that rely on the Human Rights Act, right? Suella Braverman wants to scrap it. The real reason why they're going to scrap it is because you can't have it with that China government. None of those articles can exist because you don't have the right to complete freedom of expression or freedom of speech or the right to life by the time, they're finished with, all these suicide acts and abortions. All of these rights are being heavily bombarded and attacked. And I really am disappointed with Joylan Mohan when he's focusing on transgenderism and gender. If he wants to do that, right, fair enough. But it's, at the moment, right, it's the least of our worries and problems, right? That could be sorted out. Like, it's not a main urgent priority. At the moment, right, Joylan Mohan needs to wake up and smell the coffee. There isn't going to be a Human Rights Act. They don't want it. I don't think they ever wanted it. I think if they want a Chinese government, you can't have the European Human Rights Act because you cannot have a right to privacy with that model. Because every single thing that you're doing is being surveillanced, and then they've even got private companies studying your business and stuff like that. Now, this is the thing, right? And this is where I want to say something else about these two A and B here, right? Pressing social needs, right, has got nothing to do with private businesses or companies, right? What has your social needs got to do with, BP, British Petroleum? What has your social needs got to do with a cosmetics company, right? They make a product and sell you it, right? Okay, there is I know that you wear the makeup and you go out when you're in town and you're socialising, right? But your social interactions when you're out in town are not anything to do with the company who makes cosmetics. They merely make a product and apply it to a person, right? And they've got their own laboratories, they've got their own test labs, they've got their own volunteers. They don't need to have surveillance in a shop and facial recognition to be surveilling, assessing all the customers who go into the shop. The shop's there to sell something they've already made, supposedly already studied. Now, what if they want to transform the shop into the laboratory where it's a full-on, all customers come in and, like, you know, when you enter the shop, consent, submit and accept to actually, and if you're going to buy cosmetics, you have to volunteer to become a study subject, right? If you want to, in fact, if you want a cosmetics business, right, and they've got a shop in town and they say, like, every single customer who walks through the door before they even come into the shop and look at the shelves and buy a product, they've got to consent to be a study subject so we can study them what their face was like before and then after, right? That means that, all right, I might go down to Starbucks to buy a coffee today. It's like, do you have to submit consent and accept to have your body fully assessed to see, you know, what state it's in before you drink the coffee and then see what state it's in after? You're not agreeing to be a customer. You're agreeing then to be a study subject while you're in the shop being filmed and your behaviour and all these other things, right? These companies are meant to go have their own laboratories and their own, you know, they go do the research. They've gone beyond the scope of being a shop, right? If you've got a shop, a stand, a stall, someone walks past, they look at it, if they want to buy something, it's a business interaction, right? Now, if you're buying shoes, like you used to go to Clark's, they measure your foot, right? You know, see what size your foot is, right? You are consenting to the measuring your foot for the purpose for making one pair of shoes, right? But, you know, if they want to see how you walk and all this stuff like that, you know, do they really need to do that? But these companies now are doing it kind of like they're getting you to do it up front before you even walk through. And if all the shops shut down and you were buying everything online, they'd want to measure the size as put your foot on the fucking iPad or something like that, right? What do they want you to do? Lay the iPad on the floor and walk over it? You know, this is the thing. And then do they want you to, like, record yourself walking around the room in your house and remove all your, you know, film all your body motions and all this? Companies never needed to do that. To have a pair of shoes, surely you go into the shop, they're already made, you try a few different pairs on, and the ones that feel all right, you buy them. You do not need to become a study subject to buy a pair of shoes, right? And they definitely don't need to authorise ongoing study of how you're walking and ongoing studies of how long it lasts for every single person, right? They've got their own adequate, laboratory, with people who volunteer for it. They don't need every single customer to give up their privacy for it, right? This is the area of discussion that we're in, right? And this is the thing. So if you've got a business or company and, like, look, right, if you're going to B&Q, right, you do not need to consent anything, sweet F.A., nothing, to buy a bag of fucking nails, right? When you go into B&Q, there is absolutely no reason whatsoever, no pressing social issue why they need to know anything about you to buy a bag of fucking nails and a hammer, right? You know, you don't have to consent to them filming you banging the nails in, right, on your skill, you know, on your banging, on your hammering style, right? This is for sure. Now, they only are meant to have security cameras to make sure nothing gets stolen. They don't need your facial recognition. They don't really need your facial recognition. The shop itself, right, needs to stop people nicking stuff, right? Okay, if they see you putting things in your pockets or whatever, right? But then they've also got those tags, you know, when you walk through the door, you know, if the alarm goes off, right? Why do they need to know everyone's facial shape? Oh, so that, you know, if anything gets stolen, the police can... But the police don't often get stuff like that. And you know, is it because they don't want them to have any staff there anymore and it's all just scan, and then you don't even have a card? They were wanting people to have microchips in their hands, and they've got some shops in some countries where you do not even, you don't pay, you just go in there and pick it up and it scans you and all this and you walk out. This is actually what Big Brother Watch really is about now, and I know that they probably already know this because obviously they only make short videos and they only talk about a certain aspect of it, and they have discussions and they interview people on the street, right? But they don't expect just to click their fingers and everyone understand the whole entire deep, intricate model of it, right? And I guess I wasn't thinking about it, but now I'm kind of like really on the zone with that now, right? So like, I don't think but this is the thing, right? The shop, there isn't a pressing social need for the shop to scan your face, right? And even know like all the details of your own face or any of your private business. It's a commercial sales outlet. They are for profit, they're a business, and they sell things. There is no pressing social need. Now, you might say, oh, crime and disorder, but if everyone in the shop was stealing, fair enough. If 50% of people in the shop were stealing, if 25% was, but it's not. You know, if 25% of customers stole, they would have serious problems. It's actually negligible, so there isn't a pressing social need. If you were saying like that, you know, the whole town was going berserk and everyone was rioting everywhere, and you know half the people were criminals, that would be pressing social need. There's negligible thefts, right? And the other security systems are perfectly adequate, you know, tagging things or just normal cameras that don't add all this other stuff. So it really is overstepping the mark, and it's not a social need. They're a business. Now, if you're a cricket club, right, that's social. But this is the thing. So how have all these retail, private companies and businesses managed to get all these processes and procedures active when it's not really social, it's business? Because there's a difference between social and business, right? Well, this is the thing. Well, what a coincidence, because Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin at Google, well, actually Mark Zuckerberg, and I won't say Elon Musk because he didn't start Twitter, he just bought it later on, right? Mark Zuckerberg, with the magic of the BBC, who advertised his business in England to the whole country and said, hey, everyone go on here and create a digital identity online and start adding your friends, like, you know, everyone do this now, right? And made Mark Zuckerberg into a multi-billionaire, right? Literally gave him, like, hey, do you want to be like, Mark, do you want to win the lottery? Why don't you just, like, you know, here, we'll get everyone in England to go on your website, 60 million people, boom, you know, there you go. You know, it could be you, like the national lottery, you know. This is the thing. It's social. So they call it social media, and therefore, oh, well, this is social. But there wasn't a pressing need for social media because everyone already had friends and everyone already had a life, and everyone went out in town and everyone did things like went for a walk or go to the countryside or played video games or even played board games in the house or even played, you know, a game of slaps with a family, whatever. You only have a pressing social need if you are, you know, very antisocial or find difficulty getting friends, right? And then you usually, you've got all these charities and people like that for people with pressing social needs. Generally, they never said that England has a pressing, urgent social need for social media, because then they would have said that, you know, if 50% or 51% of England was socially defective, then, you know, we would all be handicapped, wouldn't we, right? No, the majority of people in England didn't have urgent social needs. Facebook was a novelty. Facebook is like an addition. There was no urgency for it, right? Now, it is social though, but merely by being there to socialise on and to use for social purposes, does that give Facebook the right to know all the information about you. Well, this is the thing. You choose to upload certain photos from your phone, and you choose to add certain people to your page or whatever, and you choose to join certain groups, and then those people might, if you go in ancient sites and heritage groups and people upload photos of where they've been, they're choosing to share those. That's been social, right? But there's no urgent need or pressing need for you to give up any further information or any more information than that, or for those social media companies to go on your phone, or for them to gather information about you and assess you and profile you and study you and all these other things. There's no pressing social need for that. That's purely their own Nosy Parker business going beyond, what we actually would like them to know. But yet, in order to use their platforms now, they're getting you to agree, consent and accept to these things, or you're not going to be included, you're not going to be allowed to use it. And by the time they've said that to everyone who uses it, you're looking at millions of people. And by the time multiple platforms have done it, and you've said you have to give up these consents, agreements and so forth, then what privacy are you left with? And did you have an option? And then when people use the telephone less and write letters less and in the post, and it becomes a primary mode of communication and the others fall aside, and then it's like, you're not cool if you don't go on there, you've created a pressing social need because it becomes a number one communication platform. And if you don't submit consent and agree and choose not to go on there, then you'll be the one who's excluded from it, right? So it's very cunning and diabolical, right? And it was the only real legitimate way that they could try and cut into us and get into us around this Human Rights Act, because it has to be a social need. So if Facebook and YouTube did not exist, and if BBC didn't tell everyone to go on there in from 2005-7 onwards, right? Then you see all these companies and businesses, B&Q and Starbucks and blah, blah, blah. They're not social. They're enterprises. They're businesses. They're for-profit entities who sell a product, right? They're point of sale commerce, right? So once we got relaxed and felt kind of like they took the edge off it and made us feel more relaxed and comfortable with all the social media intrusions, then you notice all these other intrusions are coming in from the corporate side, but the corporate side don't have any rights to it at all under the Human Rights Act, only if the crime rises to a level where there's a pressing social need. But when crime's always negligible, there's never a pressing social need, right? Because, what's the point of having the police? If these shops are going to be so adequate at, catching criminals with all this tech, then what's the point of having the police force, right? What are we paying for the police force? Are the police force just there? When you phone the police, they don't do sweet FA anyway. They just seem to be there to catalogue things now and stuff. Should we get rid of the police if all these shops are going to have all this surveillance to do the crime monitoring instead? This is the thing. That is proportionate to the legitimate aim pursued. Well, this is what I've said, right? The legitimate aim of social media is meant to be so you can find groups of people with the same interest and speak to them. Like, so you can join a tennis club on the internet and group and discuss tennis and share pictures of it, right? Share pictures of tennis, right? That's the legitimate aim. Now, if Mark Zuckerberg wants to get you to give up all your information and then send it off to private companies who can study all your tennis skills and activity, I don't think that's a legitimate aim of social media. I think that's a corporate business interest and a strategic interest. So that also goes beyond it as well. So there are lots of elements of it here, but ultimately, it's very, very obvious and clear now. We've got that Chinese government model, and there is no right to privacy anymore, because if there was, then their governance model basically does not leave you a right to privacy. And I don't think these companies and businesses have any right at all under this Human Rights Act, because it's not their business. Our social and private life is not any of their business, that's for sure, right? And it's only when crimes rise to ridiculous levels where there's a pressing social need for security, which they seem to have been miraculously doing by all these immigrations, mysteriously coming over and being flown over on planes and putting in hotels and coming over on boats. So it's clear that the pressing need is it's significant to this, right? It's not nothing to do with it. It plays a role in this, and now that's actually happening. What a coincidence! We've got all these weird crime incidents now, and all these, there seems to be, why? Where was the pressing need for gates around schools? There was never a pressing need for gates around schools. If half the kids didn't turn up, or if half the kids went home, but when there was negligible, like 1 or 2 truants or whatever, or, like even if there was like 1,000 kids and there was like 2 or 3 truants, that's not an urgent pressing need. That's just a couple of delinquents. It's a couple of minority statistics, right? There's no pressing need for gates around schools. And even when they said there's these weirdos around, the news play on it and dramatise it and make it worse than it is, So like 100, I know that we don't want any kids in schools to suffer any abuse, but there's never not an urgent pressing need for it. I mean, if there was like 25% of kids, who were abused at school, outside the gates, then fair enough. When there's like, 1 or 2, that's not an urgent pressing need, but it's extremely negligible. And does it justify, everyone having to be treated like the school's a prison? I think that this government, right, all of these things they've been doing, this corporate sector, the corporate business sector have absolutely no right at all whatsoever under this, right? They can call it out on security, but they're going way, way, way beyond the remit of what it is to keep their store secure now. It's going way beyond that. And now I can totally understand what Big Brother Watch is about, right? But I thought they would have been onto the human rights aspect of it a bit more. But the problem is they said, there's no legislation. There isn't any legislation. There isn't any law. The government haven't made any law around the cameras. Well, they have. They got the Human Rights Act, 1998. You got the right to privacy. You have got the right to privacy, right? Now, if you go into a shop, look, right, put it this way. This is how I see it, right? And this is how I think Big Brother Watch need to understand this, right? Because in law, I was just watching Alan Robertshaw's channel, Art and Media Law with Black Belt Barrister, right? And they've got all these tests, right? I hate these stupid tests, right? The Crown Prosecution Service have got all these tests, but, they need to test them fucking selves. It'd be all right, if the Crown Prosecution Service tested themselves because they'd fail, right? All these tests, the tests, right? What was the test for this or that? Look, right, I'll give you a test, right, in a store, right? You go into a shop, right, and if we do an experiment and send someone into the shop, a person, right, it doesn't really matter if it's a person or not. Now, if that person followed you around the shop and just stared into your face, right, and walked alongside you, turned the head sideways and just stared at you and looked at you, right, you'd go, this is a bit weird. What is that person doing? And then if you thought, I'll just like go to another aisle and move away from them, right, and then they followed you, right, and then they stood next to you and they just stared at you and stood straight in front of you and looked straight at you, right, you would think that was odd behaviour, possibly even peculiar. And then you might say, excuse me, do you mind stop doing that, please, right? Now, that is what those cameras are doing. When they've got the camera on every aisle and all the time, and then it's actually looking at you and at your face all the time, and recording it, I'm like, if a person was doing that, you'd say, why are you doing that? Even if one of the store people did it. I mean, if you walk into a shop and you get a valet or you get like a caddy or you get like, a shop assistant coming up to you and going, hello, sir, can I help you? Is there anything I can do? You'd feel quite privileged, right? You'd be like, wow, this is good service. If a shop person came up to you and said, oh, can I help you, sir? What are you looking for today, sir? Would you like some more shoes, sir? Would you like a new suit, sir? Right? You would be like, hey, I'm getting very good service. But when it got to the point where, like, you said, okay, I'll just like to have a little look around by myself now, if you don't mind. But then he just carried following you, carried on following you, and then like you would try some shoes on, and then now he could start talking casually with you, right? Like a conversation, but if a shop person starts asking you too many questions about your personal life, it can be a bit peculiar or odd. Sometimes you get that in a restaurant, like they start asking you too many questions, like, about your business or whatever. And sometimes you think like we're overstepping their mark, right? And other times, if they're just, a waiter is meant to be a waiter, right? Even on the plane, Donald Trump, right, when he's on Air Force One, right? He's answering questions. He's there to answer questions from media, right? But the media come out with some questions. What Donald Trump is like, I'm not going to answer that question, or I won't take that question, right? So even when he's there to tell them things that they want to know and ask them, even then, Trump's like, no, I don't want to answer that question, or I won't take that question, right? So, if Donald Trump went to a restaurant and a waiter's serving him, right, and then he puts his foot on the table and, just does a little bow or whatever and walks off, if Donald Trump, the waiters are trained, when you've got, people like Donald Trump in there, right, if a waiter started asking Donald Trump, maybe he could ask him for his autograph, right, but if he started, talking to him too much or whatever, he's overstepping the boundary, right, do you know what I mean? And this is the thing. If it's not all right for a person to do it, why is it all right for a device to do it, right? The only thing with the devices is that they're conspicuous, right? But it's still doing the same thing. And this is the thing. Is it the fact that if a person follows you around the shop, you would just feel uncomfortable, right? Or is it the fact that they're wanting to know what you're doing? Now, the thing is that those cameras are wanting to know what you're doing, and they're gathering more data on you merely than just protecting the shop, right? Behavioural stuff and this is how the shops have ended up developing their strategies for product placement and this and that and all these other things, right? And actually, they're actually studying you, right? Now, when you walk into a shop, are you giving them consent to study? And when you buy a product from the shop, like a packet of crisps, when you get the receipt, have you signed something to say that you consented to them studying you on your crisp buying behaviour? I don't think you are. And therefore, if they wanted to do, like, why don't they use one shop to study? They don't need to do it in every single store, because they're actually studying the whole people then. They're not doing a study to find out some information on one thing and then that's it, they're done. What they're actually doing is a constant, ongoing, long-term experiment on the whole population. Surely, if you have got an electronics shop, your genuine aim is to sell electronics. That's your genuine aim, right? Your genuine aim is to sell electronics. And in fact, electronics store is not necessarily an electronics manufacturer, right? So the electronics store, actually, they don't even make electronics, right? So they're merely there to sell it. If you are an electronics manufacturer, then you're not even a shop and you don't sell it. You're there to make electronics, and then you might need to call some study subjects in to study them in order to manufacture electronics, right? But you're not the shop. So the shop itself shouldn't have or doesn't have any legitimate means to study the customers, because it's there to sell them. It's not a product manufacturer or developer. And this is the thing when they start passing these informations on to third parties to use and so forth and so forth. There are too many aims from too many concerned parties, and they end up not being legitimate, because by the time they're finished, you actually don't have any privacy left. And this is what the point of this Human Rights Act is, the boundaries of it. But I actually don't think that these stores have got any right at all beyond basic security. And this is the thing with Big Brother Watch. This is why, Big Brother Watch are like, well, there are not any laws on this. Well, there are, because the law is on your privacy, right? When you go into a shop, what is in your bag and pockets are your private affairs. In fact, your facial features and biological profile, this biometrics is your own personal business. It's not any. Your biometrics is absolutely none of the business of a retail store, because they don't even manufacture products. They're there to keep their store secure, right? And there's not an urgent pressing need. If 50% of people were stealing, or if 25% of people were stealing, but negligible people are stealing, and then, it seems to me like this country seems to be pouring criminals into it in order to create urgent pressing needs, So there definitely is a strategy behind it. I don't think that anything that they're doing is illegal, and I'd make them delete it all, But I'm disappointed that Big Brother Watch say, "Oh, there is no law." Well, there is. This is the law for it. There is a law for it. This is the law for it, and that's it. So, but they're putting misinformation out because Big Brother Watch have got they're interviewing this guy and that Madeline. She's like, "Oh no, there isn't a legislation yet. They haven't legislated." Well, they have, because what these devices and facial recognition these stores are doing are prying into your private activities in life, and there is a law there. So she's wrong. That Madeline is wrong. She's actually wrong about it and spreading misinformation. And if Big Brother Watch aren't using the Human Rights Act already, there's something wrong with them. But this goes for this paper mile as well. This paper mile tax. It's going beyond the scope of the primary reason of raising money. But this is the thing. Each one of these things is a different piece to the larger puzzle, right? What we've got is the government, and we've already got proof that other governments have basically taken away people's privacy, and that's the objective and the aim, the real objective, not just to raise revenue. And then we know that how the government are going to do that. Well, they can't just do it themselves. They need third parties, because this is what they're doing with the Advertising Standards Authority and all these other things. They're creating third parties. Google, Facebook and YouTube have become a third-party communication, replacing the telephone, and they're promoting and advertising it on their websites, on the MPs' contact pages, and they're using it to contact MPs, and they're implementing it slowly into the government, and then these social media have got all the data on us and selling it to third parties. So they've got players. It's a team, and they're doing a team rugby tackle on us, right? They're doing a team rugby tackle on us, and they're taking us from all sides. And like Mark Zuckerberg is one of the, they had Nick Clegg. He's the global president, Mark Zuckerberg is one of the flagships for it. Elon Musk he bought a social media company later on after it had all started. He wanted to do his own banking thing with it, right? And, Jeff Bezos wanted to do all the medical side part of it. It's just like, it is like in Goldfinger, when he's got the henchman in the lair, hey, it's like, hey, Jeff Bezos, I'll take care of all the medical details and all the medical information, and Mark can come in from the social media side, and then, we can get all, Billy Bronco, Bill Gates can come in with the computers, and Aladdin take over the computers systems of the governments, and then they've got someone else coming in with, Jeff Bezos is in the retail side, but all these bosses, all these executives of these companies, they're all AGM meetings, shareholders, they're all developing all this. Hey, what we're going to do to these people, we're going to Shanghai them. We're being Shanghaied. That's the thing. We're being Shanghaied by a global organization who have become so rich beyond imagination that we've allowed them to accumulate ridiculous amounts of money, fleece us all, rip us off, harm our health. Some of them don't really know what the fuck they're doing because they're dumb and they're just going along with it. Others are, like Tony Blair, are kingpins to it, Nick Clegg. And a lot, the MPs have become elected illegally because they're using illegal social media. They don't take their campaigns down, and they use their campaigns for their electoral purposes when it's going to be their MP contact page. And even Jeremy Corbyn's doing it, which is disappointing. So I'm kind of a bit fed up with it now.